Welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast, where our job is to help you build visibility, professional credibility, and connection with your ideal client by putting the human at the center of innovative marketing, so you can build and strengthen an engaging, enduring relationship with your ideal clients. I'm Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and I'm honored that you're here with me. If you haven't joined our wonderful marketing transformation community yet, go to innovabiz.co and collect your free gift as well. Do subscribe to the show and also leave a review because it helps others find us. Let's get into today's masterclass on this InnovaBuzz podcast.
Create content that your audience wants, distribute that content in the communities and channels in which your audience is spending time, find things that make you different, lean into it, embrace it, and don't be afraid to make mistakes along the way. At the end of the day, experiments are key to innovation, and if you can experiment, you're going to get a competitive advantage over the people who are not willing to do so.
Welcome back. I hope your week's been awesome so far. If you haven't listened to my recent conversations with Dr. Janine Garner, author of Be Brilliant, and Michael Roderick of Small Pond Enterprises, then do go check them out, but only after you've listened to today's conversation. I'm really excited to have on the InnovaBuzz podcast as my guest today, Ross Simmonds. He's a digital strategist and an entrepreneur with a passion for technology, communications, and, as he says, good coffee. He has spent the last 10 years working in communications and digital marketing. He's launched and built multiple companies, invested in startups. He speaks internationally. He's published a book on entrepreneurship and blogs regularly at rosssimmons.com. Ross is the founder of Foundation Marketing, a content marketing agency that combines data and creativity to develop and serve ambitious brands. Ross and his team at Foundation have launched marketing initiatives that reach millions of people on channels like Instagram, SlideShare, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and much more. In our discussion today, Ross talked to me about how to produce engaging, standout content. So content that's written information, videos, podcasts, visual presentations, and more. And we also talked about how to then distribute that content. We talked about how to repurpose your content in multiple ways to both extend its reach and its effectiveness, and why the concept of customer journeys is a much better one than funnels. Without further ado, then, let's fly into the hive and get the buzz from Ross Simmonds. Hi, I'm your host, Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and I'm really excited to welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast today my first guest from Nova Scotia, Halifax in Canada, Ross Simmonds. Ross is a digital marketing strategist and entrepreneur. He's the founder of Hustle and Grind e-commerce store and also Foundation Marketing, which is a B2B content marketing agency. Welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast, Ross. It's a real privilege to have you as my guest.
Thanks so much for having me on. I'm excited to chat with you about innovation. I love the InnovaBuzz podcast, so I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, and it's wonderful that we can have these conversations all around the world and we can listen into podcasts all around the world.
That's for sure, 100%.
Now, before we start talking about e-commerce and marketing, which is a big passion of mine, marketing. So tell us a little bit about your background. What were some of the pivotal moments to get you to where you are today?
Definitely. So I would say I'm an entrepreneur through and through. Like when I was a young kid, I always was creating things. I started a board game company kind of when I was in elementary school. Me and my cousin created our first 2 board games. And that kind of created the itch for just like creating new things. Throughout high school, I ran a business where I was selling do-rags out of my locker. And then in university, I ran a fantasy football blog. So I always had that bug around entrepreneurship. And then in university, what was pivotal was the fact that I was able to make money and connect with people all over the globe from my parents' basement in Nova Scotia. And I had people from all over the world reading my thoughts about fantasy sports and who they should start in their fantasy football leagues. And that's when the light bulb started to go off that this was a real opportunity. So I monetized that website, was able to pay for a good chunk of my tuition. But as that business started to kind of take off, my marks started to go down, and my mom told me I had to switch that fantasy football blog off and start focusing on my academics. So I started another blog, which was essentially about marketing, just writing about what I was learning in school. And that kind of became my career. And it all started by just kind of scratching that itch around creating things and building things, and then seeing the fact that, wow, this internet thing is going to last. And I kind of created a career out of it. And today, I kind of just focus on the internet, and I always tell my friends and my family that I play on the internet for fun and for business. So it kind of has worked out.
Yeah. Were you always a prolific writer or producer of content?
It's interesting. When I was really, really young, if you go back to the elementary days, I was pretty prolific with writing. I didn't write with any kind of purpose in mind, but I can remember as a kid, like trying to write my own movie scripts and trying to write books and things of that nature. I had a very in-depth documentary style editorial piece that I had written when I was a kid about kind of like the Roman Empire, and it never got published. I have no idea what hard drive it's on, but my heart is still in that piece because I think it could have been something great, but I haven't been able to track it down. And I probably would look at it today and be like, whoa, what was I writing? But yeah, I've always loved the written word. I always have found it fun.
Hmm. All right. Well, that's a fascinating story. And, today you're a really prolific producer of, in particular, videos. That seems to be your preferred medium. So, and I know, you talk a lot about the distribution part of content.
Yeah.
So we can talk a little bit about writing content and what makes some great content. But I think the distribution part is the bit that fascinates me. And
Mm,
it's like, I mean, with podcasting, producing the podcast and keeping it
right.
regular is quite a bit of work, but that's only a small part of it. It's actually the distribution and getting people to find it is
Yeah.
the really big thing, and that's a marketing exercise. So tell us a little bit about your thoughts on that in terms of content production versus sharing the content and distributing it.
For sure. So I would say, without question, content distribution is one of the most underrated elements of the marketing mix. We, as marketers, have preached for a long time that content is king. Create great content, and the world will be yours. Create good content, and the results will follow. We've preached that at the top of our lungs for so long that the market and the industry has listened, and that's good. It's good that people are creating good content now. It's good that people are creating great content. But I can remember back to when I was creating early pieces of content that was relatively good. I would press publish and I would generate like 2 likes, 2 visits. One was always from my mom, and it wasn't a lot of engagement. And the reality was, I was focused so much on trying to create good content that I didn't have any energy after I pressed publish to actually spread that content to audiences that were outside of my circle. And that is the key. When it comes to content distribution, it's a flip on this concept that your job is done as a content marketer when you press publish on a new video, a new ebook, a new blog post, a new podcast. But that is when the life cycle actually begins. And it's now on you to start distributing that content more effectively across a wide variety of different channels. That's the key. I think for me, the pain point came when I pressed publish on all of those blog posts and I realized this is good content, but it's just not reaching the right amount of people. And therefore, it doesn't have a sample size to demonstrate whether or not this is a quality piece of content or not.
Hmm.
And for the most part, I think that's the issue that happens with most content creators. They start to develop their first pieces of content. They have a podcast for 2 months. They're recording episodes. They're publishing content. They're uploading videos to YouTube. But their sample size for feedback is really, really low. And then they quit because they don't know why their content wasn't resonating with people. It's not resonating with people because you're not reaching enough people. You're not getting it in front of the audience that is key for that content to take off. So that whole concept of content distribution for me is not only a personal mandate, but it's also something that we've been doing with clients through Foundation Marketing, where we actually help clients with their distribution efforts. And I think the more that we can preach and talk about the fact that content distribution is important, the more likelihood that brands and marketers are going to start finding success. And even just general creators and entrepreneurs are going to start finding success because they're going to start doubling down their attention on distribution just as much as they did on creation.
Hmm. Hmm. It's interesting. I was having a conversation with a couple of my clients who do podcasting, and we were talking about motivation for continuing
Mm,
podcasting, and both of them, the motivation is waning a little bit, and it comes back to
yeah.
that they're both people that work in the space of being on stages
Mm,
and having an audience in front of them and reading that audience's responses in terms of
right.
adjusting their own information that they're presenting, how they're presenting it, what they're presenting, so the content and the style
Right.
to adapt to that audience. And
Right.
with a podcast, they're not getting that feedback, so
It's
it's kind
true.
of distance
True.
because you're just in front of a microphone and maybe a
Right.
camera, and there's nobody there. Now the other part of that, of course, is what you're talking about, and that's getting the feedback
Yeah.
through people seeing the content, hearing the
Yeah.
content, or reading the content if it's a written word, and making comments somewhere. So that's a really important point. Then the distribution and getting it in front of that audience so that you can get that
For
feedback,
sure.
because there's that motivational element as well to keep going and keep
True.
putting the effort in to produce the content.
100%. I think that's a great insight, right? Like, I think at the end of the day, a lot of us kind of need to have some type of motivation to continue when we start to create things. Like, nobody creates things just for themselves unless you're writing a journal. You create with the intent of seeing some type of response from the community. So I think knowing at the end of it, like, you have the responsibility to also spread that content and get it in front of more people is a great one. And I, as a public speaker, someone who speaks on stage, I can definitely feel the pain of some of your clients and folks that
Mm,
you've worked with who don't get that immediate feedback when you're on a podcast or you're uploading YouTube videos. If you don't see comments, etc., it can kind of feel discouraging. But the majority of people are silent consumers, right? Like, the
yep.
majority of people are not going to give you a 5-star review on your podcast. They're going to consume it. They're going to get a lot of value about it. They're going to remember you. And that's as far as it's going to go. That's still you adding value to a lot of people at scale. They're just not going to be the loud folks who are sending out stories and Instagram posts and writing a blog
Mm,
post about it. Like, that's just the majority of people. So I think people need to really recognize, like, you have to keep going. You have to keep putting in the work and view it as more of an investment than anything. I think when you're taking time out of your day to create a podcast, to create a video, to create any type of content asset, remember, it is an asset. It's not just something that you
mm.
allowed to live once and then call it a day. This is an asset that you've invested in. So work on that over time and start to generate dividends from it. And the longer it exists, the longer your reward is going to be as well.
Yeah, yeah. I like the looking at all the content as an asset, and I want to explore the idea of how do you use that asset in multiple
For
ways.
sure.
I know you're a big fan of repurposing, so I'll touch on that later. But I wanted to ask the, I mean, one of the things that frustrates me a lot, I post on social media, and
Yep.
then I see posts on social media that generate a lot of comments from
Yeah.
those people's community, and I'm guessing that those comments mean that that original post will get to be seen by more
Right.
people because it'll be that audience of the commenter that you actually reach as well. And yet,
Mhm.
a lot of the ones I post, there's no comment at all, and I put
Right.
something up there, and I think, oh, this is going to be
This is going to be
provocative,
good.
or it
Right.
might be really interesting, or
Yeah.
something, and that's just my opinion, obviously. And it's crickets. You put it up, and it's
Right.
crickets. So,
Yeah.
what what are your thoughts on that? I mean, is it the quality of the content? Is it, or are there some other things you
Yeah.
can do
Great
to
question.
kind of get that?
There's a lot of factors there that can go into it. I think there's a few layers. One, every platform is different. So every type of platform is going to have different types of content that are more likely to resonate with an audience than the next. The content that you share on LinkedIn is going to resonate with folks in a different way than the content that goes on Facebook. The reason is because people go onto these channels for different things. People go to LinkedIn because they want to connect with other business professionals, they want to learn. People go on Facebook typically because they want to be distracted, they want to be entertained, or they want to look up their ex from high school and see what she or he is doing, right? Like, the motivation to get there is very different. Entertaining content does extremely well on Facebook. Educational content does extremely well on LinkedIn. Short, snippy content will do better on Twitter, especially if you can throw a little bit of outrage in it. That content's going to increase a lot of engagement on Twitter. And on channels like TikTok and Snapchat, I really don't know what content works on those platforms yet, but it's very different from what I've ever seen before. So I think the key is to first understand that the channels are different. From there, you have to think about your audience and try to uncover like what are the things that are actually truly keeping them up all night on, let's say, LinkedIn. Like what are the things that you can put in front of them that's going to catch their attention, that's going to make them want to read your piece of content, make them want to consume it. I have this philosophy around what I call the 3 E's. It's educate, engage, and entertain. The content that you create has to do one of those 3 things. And if it doesn't, it's probably not worth pressing publish on. Once you've accomplished that, the next step is to start looking at the fundamentals of why this piece may not have generated as much engagement. Are you using the right hashtags? Do you start your copy in this status update that you're sharing with a line that's going to break the norm and really capture their attention? How do you start the copy? Is it emotional? Is it going to grab me, et cetera? You want to start with those types of things. And then the final piece that I think is a low-hanging fruit, and we recently released this thing called the distribution challenge. And it's actually one of the key elements that we talk about in the distribution challenge is the fact that you need to embrace your friendlies. What I mean by that is embrace the people who are in your circle, who are in your tribe that you can consider like your first level connections. And the reason why you want to embrace them is because you're not just going to use these people as kind of, oh, they're my friends, they might like it. You're going to take your status, your update into your own control and share it with them so they know that you just put up a post, because you can't rely on the algorithm to serve up your content. You need to inform your friends, hey, I just put up this piece of content. I would love for your comment. I would love to get your take. Let me know what you think. Some of them are going to like it. Some of them are going to comment on it. Some of them are going to get shares on it. That's what a lot of the influencers that we see on Instagram, on Twitter, et cetera, doing on a regular basis. They have actual email chains set up where when they go live on a LinkedIn update, they're emailing all their friends and saying, hey, folks, I just shared this. I would love some amplification. Hey, folks, I just put this out on Twitter. I would love a retweet. So they're getting a small group of people with a similar following level to retweet their content as well. And that gives them even additional reach on top of what they already have.
So you would recommend sending out email to those people and to point out the post on social media, for example. What I've seen people doing is posting something and then tagging a whole bunch of people to kind of
I'm not a fan of that approach. I've seen it as well. That's kind of borderline spamming in some ways, right? You're disrupting somebody. I'm sitting downstairs with my daughter and I get a notification, Ross, you've been tagged on a post, and I'm like, whoa, what happened? What did I do? And then you see that it's just somebody tagging you as well as 500 other marketers. It doesn't give the same result. What I would prefer is like if I had a connection with that person, them to say, hey, Ross, I just put up this post where I'm talking about X, Y, and Z. I would love to get your thoughts on it. That's more genuine. It feels more personalized. I know it's not very easy to scale, but by me then interacting on it, they then have the likelihood of getting a more authentic response from me. And as a result of a more authentic response, it's going to be a more valuable dialogue for my followers as well as theirs, and it gives them the ability to get more reach. It's the same strategy if you look back at the early days of musicians' careers. Like everybody wanted to get featured with the next great thing, like the next great artist. You want to get featured with them on your album. And that is essentially the game that you can play with a lot of this content distribution efforts. It's like, okay, rather than just trying to press publish on this piece of content and hoping your audience amplifies it, why don't you connect with somebody else in your industry to get them to engage with it, and all boats rise at the same time, where you can all engage, you can all grow at the same time, and you're interacting with each other's work.
Yeah, that's great advice. I'll have to start incorporating that in my distribution. So what are some of the big things, the big impact things that people can do to get more distribution for their content, their assets?
Great question. So I think it starts with research. I think you start by understanding who it is that you're trying to reach. So if you're trying to reach, let's say, somebody who's in the world of interior design, you want to go into their world and start to think about what type of content do they consume on a regular basis when it comes to their business. Are they spending time in Facebook groups? If so, you're going to go to Facebook, you're going to go to the search bar, and you're going to type in something like interior design, and you're going to click groups and see what Facebook groups show up for interior designers. It might turn out that there are hundreds of groups. It might turn out that there are 50 groups. But what's interesting is the fact that within those groups, are going to be the audience that you're trying to reach. So the next step is to join those groups. Once you're in these groups, you're going to start to get a better sense of what are the best practices for how people are interacting in this community. Are they sharing links? Are they sharing content, etc.? And then you're going to apply the knowledge that you get by observing that group to your own distribution strategy. If you see that people are able to share links, you're going to start sharing your links. If you go into a community and you see that people aren't sharing links, they're only sharing videos, then maybe you're going to start creating videos and then start sharing those videos into that group as well. It all starts with research and understanding your audience. That interior design group on Facebook isn't the only place where interior designers spend time. They might also be in a subreddit. They might also follow a certain newsletter. They might also be a part of a website like Houzz, Houzz. With all of those communities, you might now have to become a member of them and then start thinking about how you can distribute your stories into these different channels. Now, at first glance, a lot of people are thinking to themselves, hearing me talk about all of these different channels, whoa, my audience could be in Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, Slack, they could be in Medium, etc. They could be in all of these channels. Ross, how in the world am I going to do all of this? I always say, well, okay, I don't actually always say this. My dad always used to say, it's better to have one good kid than a bunch of bad ones. And I think the same thing exists for social media and distribution. It's better to be really, really good at one channel before you start jumping in and being mediocre on all. So start with Facebook groups and become really, really good at it. And then jump over to, I'm going to use Houzz or I'm going to use Reddit. Start really, really good on one specific channel and then move on. And if you do that, over time, you're going to have a distribution engine within your organization or within your own efforts that you're doing for your own business that are going to actually drive you way more results than if you were trying to do everything mediocre rather than just being excellent at one.
Yeah, that's great advice. And, there's a lot of really fundamental marketing advice in there that I think is really core to a whole lot of marketing. And that's, start with understanding your audience and where they hang out, how they prefer to interact, and also the power of focus. I mean, the power of focus is something that is really hard to underestimate.
It is. It is. And it's so important, right? Like it's easy to chase the shiny ball, especially in marketing. There's a new channel, a new place that you could visit and try to engage with at every single turn, right? Like every month there's a new network, a new place that you could spend time on. But you have to go where it works, right? Like you have to spend time in embracing those channels that are working. And at the same time, I always say it's okay to kind of innovate and try new channels. Like I'm all for innovation as it relates to like testing TikTok and testing Snapchat and testing WhatsApp or whatever the new tool is. But at the same time, you want to know that within your distribution engine, there are some things that are just going to constantly work, right? You want to do at least 80% of the things that you're doing every single day to actually drive results. And you have no question that they're going to result in more eyeballs, more leads, more prospects, more traffic, etc. And then the rest, you can start innovating with. You can start doing things that are a little bit outside of the norm within your industry that don't really have a concrete understanding of, is this risky? Is this high risk, etc. I think there's an appetite and an opportunity there, but you have to make sure that you balance the two.
Yeah, I like the 80-20 approach because it still gives you permission to try things out and play with new shiny toys and innovate when you see an opportunity to jump in with something new, but at the same time your core is focused on the thing that actually that works, and you spend time on focusing on that. That's all right. So what are some of the key things, coming back to the content itself, what are some of the key things to produce a really good piece of content that, because that's probably fundamental to start with, right? You've got to have something that's really good and interesting to that audience that you've identified. Otherwise, there's no point in doing the distribution bit because you're probably wasting your time if it's rubbish.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you are. It's true. Like a lot of people do make the mistake of thinking, okay, I can create a bunch of content because I'm going to hire someone on Upwork who can do it for $2, and I'm just going to create a bunch of mediocre content and I'm going to distribute it like wildfire and I'm going to win. It doesn't work that way. People still want quality content on the end of their click. And if you don't give them that, then they're going to get upset. They're going to block you, unfollow you, and never read anything else that you create again. So the way that I would advise any brand, again, to create valuable content is to start by understanding those channels that we talked about. Let's say you've researched and identified that the people who you're trying to reach are using a certain subreddit, and that's where they're spending time. What I would advise you to do is look at, in that community, what content has risen to the top since its creation. Since 2009, when this group started, what are the top pieces of content that generated a lot of engagement, that had a lot of comments on them, that generated the most upvotes, etc.? And use that to determine, okay, these are the lanes, these are the topics, these are the themes that this community wants. If you're in an interior design group and you see that the vast majority of the content that is trending is always about tips or color palettes, guess what you're going to be creating content about? Color palettes and tips. So you then create content that you know your audience is going to want, and then you start to deliver it to them over and over again. That's the goal. That's what comes out of kind of researching your audience, and then you just create content that you know that they're going to enjoy and appreciate. When it comes to the fundamental elements of like what's in that asset that you're creating, I always say reverse engineer what works. It's a technique that I call like the Sherlock Homeboy approach, but it's essentially this idea that you're going to actually spend time diving deep into the various assets that are working in these channels and just start thinking, okay, do they use imagery? Do they embed tweets? Do they use charts? Do they have white papers? Are they using third-party references? Like what goes into the content that is actually resonating with this community? Once you've used the Sherlock Homeboy approach to kind of figure that out, the next step is to just go create it. And then when you create it, you go back to those communities where you did all of that research and you give it to them and you watch that content generate the traction and the engagement levels that you were hoping for.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a great approach. It's sort of a really structured modeling approach, isn't it? So to take something that's working really well and modeling from that. So I guess it raises in my mind, though, two questions. The first one is, how do you stand out from the noise? So if you go in there, there's probably hundreds or thousands of these types of articles. So how do you make something that stands out from the
Great question.
head and shoulders above the others?
So there's two ways that I think you can do it. One way is essentially by purely being curious. And if you are constantly being curious and you're gathering information from different sources, you're reading different books, you're reading different industry content, you're not just solely focused on your own specific niche and only in that group. So if I'm creating content about interior design, I'm in that group for a moment, but that's not the only place that I want to play. I also want to just go and review some of the content that might be trending in a community about gardening. And the reason why I want to do that is because I want to see if there's any formats that are better or more interesting in that community that I can use as inspiration and take it back to the interior design one. That's what you have an opportunity to do when you start to be curious. So simply by being curious, you're able to gain inspiration from a variety of different places, and you come together to craft something that is new for your audience, for your niche, while it may be already something that is resonating with folks in an entire different space. The other way that you should go about it in terms of kind of how to ensure that you're not blending in and that you stand out is to recognize that people will be more likely to resonate with content that is a little bit more different and a little bit more you. So when you are creating your pieces of content, don't be afraid to show your own personality and to show things about your content that are completely different from the competition. You want to find your own unique spin, the same way that for years we've had tons and tons of different pop hits. But the reason why pop still works is because people are taking it and then applying their own unique spin to it. We've had tons and tons of country hits, of dance records, but it's always still relevant. People are still seeing new musicians, new artists come out of the woodworks. And the reason why is because these new artists are adding their own spin to it. So we as creators, as business owners, as content creators, even in the wonderful world of just pure business creation, we should be thinking about how we can add our own spin to different things that may already exist. I always say, if you look at the sneaker industry, the footwear industry as a whole, there are billions of dollars to be made in that industry as a whole. Within it, we have Nike, we have Reebok, we have Adidas, we have Crocs, we have Allbirds, we have so many different shoes, and that doesn't even talk about any of the high heels, etc. There's so many variations of footwear that you can be interested in. But every single year, because people as humans have a fundamental need to have something on their feet, people are able to innovate slightly and improve on what already exists. And if you have a commitment with your content of creating things that are slightly better than what already exists, things that are slightly different from what already exists, it gives you an endless amount of room to improve, to innovate, and to create things that have never existed within your audience's life cycle of consuming content online.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. And I think you've answered my second question as well, which was going to be, if you're modeling and if you're deconstructing these articles and modeling off them, how do you kind of add your own unique flavor? How do
Right.
you
Yeah,
make it your own? So, yeah, I think that was part of the differentiation or standing out.
for
Mm.
sure.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's talk about repurposing. So you've put your heart and soul into creating this great piece of content, this asset that's there, and hopefully it's something that is timeless, or at least
Right.
has a lifespan that's more than just the moment it was created and the moment it was read.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts on various repurposing techniques, and how do you go about that?
That's a great question. So, as you mentioned earlier, like one of my favorite ways to repurpose content is with video. I think video is one of the best formats today because people want to be connected to people. So, when people see a video, they connect with the person on the other end of the screen. It's very engaging, it's very entertaining, and people love to kind of connect with them. Another format is podcast. Like, I love audio formats. I think that repurposing content into an audio format is a great way. It's very intimate, it feels like you're connected to the person. Like right now, somebody is listening to me say these words, and I'm inside of their ears, probably in
Mm.
their earbuds, while they're in the kitchen or they're on the treadmill. And that's kind of wild, right? Like to know that you're that intimate with someone, you're essentially in their brain. Those types of content formats do extremely well when it comes to repurposing. So if you are on a video or if you are on a podcast, I always advise people to look for snippets, to look for sections of that content, and then repurpose it in ways that can be reshared on other channels. So if I'm on a podcast, I'm going to look for snippets where I'm talking about a certain topic. I'm going to cut that clip. I'm going to reformat it in a YouTube video of some sort. And I'm going to share that not only on my Instagram story, but I'm also going to share it on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and probably even on my Facebook account. And that way, I'm getting a lot more reach out of one asset that was originally created with just a podcast interview. You can do the same thing with a YouTube video. If you created a video, you can then repurpose that video into snippets and take various sections of it and start to share that content across a wide range of different platforms through video, whether it's a story or a feed post, etc. You can start to chop that content up and start to share it. Now, what's also interesting is once you have all of these pieces of content, you can also turn them into the written word. It's very cost efficient these days to actually get transcriptions done on podcasts or on YouTube videos. So if you're getting someone to transcribe that content and then you're republishing it on your blog post, maybe you're adding a little bit more context to it. So in a podcast that you've recorded with the transcription, you're adding imagery, you're adding graphics, you're adding charts, etc. You're making it a little bit more richer. You're embedding YouTube videos from that person who you're interviewing, etc., or anything that they reference. You make that content stand alone on its own legs without the podcast itself being the focus. And then from there, you now have an entire new asset that you can distribute through your LinkedIn account, through your Twitter account, through your Facebook account, etc. So what you want to do is, again, create a bit of a distribution and repurposing engine where when you press publish on a certain type of asset, these are the ways in which that content is going to live beyond its life cycle of just being press publish on. If you know exactly what you're going to do next after you press publish on a piece of content, and you start to repurpose it and reformat it, you're going to reach more people. And if you reach more people, you're going to increase the likelihood that you can have a bigger impact on your audience that you're trying to reach, which ultimately should result in a business result for your business and for your company goals. So that's the way that I like to think about it. It's like one asset, create it once, and then repurpose it, remix it, and revise it for the rest of your life, essentially, unless it gets outdated and you can no longer use references to it. But I would say like one asset should be distributed and repurposed forever until your audience is essentially fatigued of that conversation.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's a lot that can be done, and I was listening. I can't remember who who told me this. It might have been one of my podcast guests. So if it was, I'm sorry that I've forgotten, but I got a sneaking suspicion it was actually outside my podcast space.
Fair.
But they were talking about 18 or 19 pieces of content, I think,
Wow.
from a blog post or from a podcast episode.
That's awesome.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's a lot. And I think that's the opportunity. It does exist, right? Like if you look at this podcast alone, there's been a lot of times where I've said things that I will probably take out and turn into tweets. And I'll just share a tweet based off of a thought that I shared on this podcast. And I think that that's the opportunity that exists from podcasting or just YouTube videos or written content. You can always be repurposing that content and spreading it in different ways. It's just up to the creator to take the time to do it. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges. It's not a short, quick win for a lot of creators or people who are running a solo company, et cetera, to say, okay, I'm going to repurpose this. But if you go back to the fundamentals that we talked about earlier around viewing it as an asset, it starts to become easier to justify why you should do that work, because that asset can ultimately pay you dividends down the road. One tweet can change your life. One podcast episode can change your career. All you have to do is put in the time and energy to make sure that that content gets in front of the people who can make those changes happen.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some great wisdom in that, that one piece of content or podcast or whatever it might be, video can have life-changing consequences if it gets in front of the right people and helps the right people. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that goes back to the motivation piece that you were talking about earlier, right? Like when people are trying to figure out how to stay motivated about it, just like keep in mind, folks, like you're literally you could be one podcast away from changing your life. Like you could be one podcast episode away from getting the perfect guest who's going to distribute this to the right audience, and the right listener is going to hear it, and they're going to send you a wire for money that could change your life or something like that. You just have to remember that at the core.
Yeah. Yeah. With the podcast, and dragging out quotes and things that you've said, I like that, because what we do with these episodes is we actually pull out 10 quotes, and that's just an arbitrary number that I've kind of said. We pull out 10 quotes from the guest, and we put together, we have 10 tweets then. So we have a document and we send out these tweets over time, but we also put together a little presentation, a little PDF that ends up being a slideshow on LinkedIn with those 10 quotes. So it's just sort of it's the same content, but just a different presentation. And it's quite amazing. And as I say, that 10 is just an arbitrary number. We said, let's take 10 things people have said. And most of the times we could probably take 20 or 30 quotes because of the value that people are giving in just a conversation that's unscripted, unplanned. There's not a lot of planning or work that goes into these conversations, as opposed to when you're writing a big blog post where you talked about all the research that you do to create something really good.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things that I've noticed, like that you do on the site, is you have the like click to tweet buttons on the actual transcription pages for folks. It's like that's the type of thing that gives that the person who's like an actual guest the opportunity to reach even more people. So making it easier for folks to even promote that content and distribute that transcription and the actual blog post associated with the podcast is huge. And if your listeners haven't checked out the site to see it, I strongly recommend they check it out, because it is a brilliant approach to have that click to tweet button directly in some of those episodes. But like that's distribution done right. It's empowering also like user generated content, which I think is underrated from a distribution lens. You can inspire other people to do your distribution for you, kind of like what you're doing there. I think it's a low-hanging fruit. So hats off to you folks for doing it. It's a smart play.
Yeah. Well, the philosophy behind that, of course, is make it as easy as possible for people to do those things. Otherwise, the harder you make it, the less likely they are to do that for you. And I can't remember. I think I was. Oh, that's right. I was buying some wine as a birthday present for my son, who's in San Francisco. Oh, cool. So I was ordering wine online in Sonoma. We a little winery that we've both been to, and we love their wine. And I was ordering some wine online, and you'd think in today's situation where people aren't actually going to the winery, that
Yeah.
their ordering system would be really good. But it was so difficult. It took me about
Oh,
half
really?
an hour to buy
See, and you'll
some.
never get that time back. Yeah, like
That's right,
that's
yeah.
brutal.
And I keep thinking to myself, "Why do people make it so hard to
Right. It's
to
so
do
true.
business
People to
with?"
give you money. Yeah,
Yeah,
make it
yeah.
easy for people to give you money. So true.
So, yeah, so that's my philosophy. If you want people to distribute your content, you've got to make it as easy as possible for them.
You do.
Mm.
100%. I love that.
Hmm. Okay, now, one of the other things you talk about quite a bit in your videos, I think, is funnels versus journeys, and
Yeah.
that resonated with me as well because I'm kind of starting to get over this funnel. And I did a solo
Yeah.
episode a little while ago on my other show where I shared. Russell Brunson actually asked for some help with sharing his latest book, which is
Right.
I can't remember the exact title, but it talks about funnels.
Okay.
And because I think he was one of the people that first coined the phrase,
Right.
and there was some really interesting stuff in his sample chapters that he sent, and I used one of the sample chapters, and I talked a little bit and used that as
Cool.
I repurposed his content basically.
Nice. Nice.
And
Nice.
but the title of my episode was "It's Not Funnels, It's People."
Right. Right. Right.
Because
Yeah.
I kind of repurposed it a little bit. So, yeah,
I
so
like it.
talk to us a little bit about your thoughts on that, because I know you're probably well aligned with mine.
I am, yeah. I think here the reality is like people forget that we're dealing with people on the other end of the keyboard, right? Like I
Mm,
think because we've spent so much time behind a keyboard that we forget that the people we actually talk to aren't just pixels, like they're flesh and blood, and they've got a whole bunch of emotions and chemicals running through their veins that are causing them to react different ways to different things. And when you start to have that fundamental understanding, you start to realize that all of the ideas of perfect attribution around how you can move someone from the top of funnel to the bottom of the funnel is very much a high level ideology that is rooted in hope. And yes, a funnel as a whole, like that whole theory, can drive results. But there's a lot of moving parts that are very difficult to actually attribute back to where that person is in a funnel and where they actually end up in terms of actually buying from you, which is why more than anything, I think we need to view the customer buying from you as a journey. And the journey can exist at various points, at various starting points. There can be various types of content that kind of trigger them to start that journey, whatever it may be. And also remember that the game is long in terms of the lifetime value of a potential customer. When that person closes, so to speak, in a funnel term, it doesn't really end the fact that you still want to provide value to them, you still want to
mm,
connect with them. You want to continuously be building that relationship. It's not over when they buy. You want to maintain that. And that becomes the relationship that you are going to establish with them for years to come. Somebody who listens to this podcast can listen to this in 2021, and they may not actually buy from me until 2028. And that's okay because I'm not viewing this podcast as, okay, I need to get people into my funnel. I'm just viewing this as a touch point where I'm able to add value to somebody who's listening to this. And hopefully, maybe someday down the road, they're able to come across something that I create and they share it, they engage with it. And it just provides the idea that if I can give value to the world will give me value back. I don't think that it's very healthy to constantly be thinking about every person you meet as, oh, they're in my funnel now, they're in my funnel now, versus just viewing them as a person. And the hope is that you build a relationship and ultimately over time, they may actually convert into something. But if they don't, that's okay too, as long as you gave them value at that point in time in your relationship.
Yeah, I love that, and I love that you said um, the journey continues once
Yeah,
they become a customer, because that's my whole philosophy around marketing. Is it's not, once you've made the sale, that's not the end of it. It's still,
right.
you've still got to deliver on the promise that you've made. You've still
Exactly.
and there's still a lot of marketing, because the customers that you delight
Yeah,
and inspire to go out and talk about you in a
right,
positive
right.
way and say, "Hey, Ross really helped me do this. He's changed
Yeah,
my whole business." Well, they're probably the best form of marketing you can have. So,
exactly.
and it comes back to what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah,
Producing the content's just part of it. The distribution
that's it.
is really key as well. So
Exactly.
winning the customer is just part of it. Delighting
Yeah,
them and inspiring them to talk about you, and
yeah,
also you've built trust with that person. So if you're exploring new ways to help people,
Right.
they're the first people that you should be
Exactly.
letting test that out and then
100%.
giving them the opportunity to buy those new services or products because
Exactly.
you've already won their trust, right?
That's
They
it.
already like
100%.
you. They already think you're wonderful because you've done all this other stuff.
Right. Yeah, you've added so much value to them
Mm,
already. It's like it would be a shame for you to kind of say, "Oh, we got value back from you. We're good. Let's call it a quits." Like, no, you want to maintain that
yeah.
relationship and amplify their voices so you can get more value out of their network, etc. I think that's key. I'm spot on with you on that.
Hmm. Yeah, and one of my pet peeves actually is, and I'm seeing this a lot right now, which is people are putting special offers out because of
Right.
the COVID situation. Hey, we
Yeah.
want to help the community. Here's a special deal for
Right.
COVID only. It's
Yeah.
either it's free for 6 months or it's half price
Right.
for 6 months or so on, but only for new customers.
Right.
And I think,
Right.
oh, okay,
Yeah, I agree, like, that's such a defeated approach, right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
you have to treat the people who helped you get to this point
Hmm,
before you help people who have never given you anything, right? Like, you
hmm,
wanna help the people who are actual loyal customers who have helped you, who are actually allowing you to persist through COVID, and paying your bills, like, you wanna give value to them just the same,
hmm.
not just new people.
Yeah, which is, to me, that's managing that customer journey really well.
Exactly.
If
It is.
doing it that way rather than the other approach is the traditional funnel approach. Let's get more people in the top of the funnel. Don't
That's
worry
it.
about the ones down further down.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah, 100%. It's definitely a broken approach. I think you have to worry about the people who are actually like caring about your business, loving your business. And sure, there's value in net new and getting new people in the door, but you have to take care of the people who are in your house first and foremost before you start welcoming new strangers in the door.
hmm. Yeah, and I like that you also said you're putting out some value. Like, I mean, there's great value in this conversation today, and you're
Thank
giving us heaps of value there, but putting it out there without the expectation. And I think that's where a lot of people get disappointed because they have an expectation there, and
Right.
and the expectation obviously is time bound. So there's
Yeah,
I want an immediate return on this, and when that
right.
immediate return doesn't happen, then they're disappointed, and that might be come back to that motivation piece as well. So with the customer journeys, I like to think of George Bryant, who we had on episode 300, and we also had him earlier. I can't remember the other episode number. But
Right.
his philosophy is that there's four types of customer journeys, and I think I think it's a lot more confusing than that. But if you think of
Right.
these four frameworks, I think that helps clarify it. So the first journey is somebody hears you, for example, on a podcast, and they say, "No, that's not for me. Not interested." They leave.
Right.
That's actually a customer journey. The second one
True.
is somebody hears you and said, "Oh, I'm really interested in Ross. He's got some really interesting things to say. I'm going to go and check him out on social media and just
Yeah.
kind of follow what he's putting out there."
Right.
Which, but they're not interested in buying anything right
Buying
now, but
anything.
they
Exactly.
just want to keep hearing what you're
Learn
saying.
more. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
learn more. That's it. They'll learn more. One. Then the next one is they actually want to join a community. So maybe they're interested in, hey, this distribution channel you've got running,
Right. Right.
challenge. Where's that? I might join that. So they become part of the community, and then there's a different relationship starting to
Right.
form there. Or they might say, hey, you've convinced me straight away. So
Right. Let's
they'll
work for you.
they'll sign up for a lead magnet and come in right into your community in deep way
Exactly.
and start to work with you. So there's if you take that approach, you think, well, there's a whole bunch of people, and even the ones that say, I'm not really interested, I listen in five
Yeah.
minutes and I'm gone.
Right.
Um, at some point, they might come across you somewhere
Again.
and they say,
Exactly.
wasn't he the guy on
Right.
that podcast?
Exactly.
And then they might
100%.
come in. So, they're not out of the environment.
No, exactly. I think that's the key. And I think the focus on adding value first and not really having expectations of what's going to happen, what the customer journey is going to look like necessarily is key, right? Like Warren Buffett always said that the secret to happiness is having low expectations. And I think that's the reality even in the world of marketing, right? Like it's the that's the reality of investing, but it's also the reality when it comes to marketing. Like if you have low expectations and you add value to the world, you will be blown away and very happy when you see the value that the world gives you back.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's, um, those of us that are kind of service focused and,
Yeah.
motivated by giving value to other people. That's
Right.
a really good philosophy to follow. Now, that doesn't mean to say you give everything away. It's
No,
clearly not.
exactly.
You get
Right.
rewarded, but the idea of an expectation from everything that you do is a bit of a fallacy, and that's
sure.
one of the things I think I don't like about the funnel approach. Yeah.
Yeah. 100%.
All right. Well, this has been absolutely fabulous, Ross. I'm just watching the clock here on my timer recorder there, and so I think it's a good point now to move
Cool.
on to the buzz, which is our innovation round, and it's
Let's do it.
designed to help our audience, who are primarily innovators and leaders in their field, with some tips from your experience. And hopefully, we've got 5 questions, and hopefully you'll give us some answers that'll inspire the listener to go and do something awesome as a result today.
Cool. All right, let's do it.
Right. So what do you think the number one thing is anyone needs to do to be more innovative?
Constantly be reading. I don't think there's anything better than just learning and reading. And I say reading, I think over time that's kind of evolving, like audiobooks and listening to podcasts, et cetera, is also starting to contribute to what the goal is of reading. But at the end of the day, you have to expose yourself to new ideas and new concepts daily and regularly, and that will open your mind to new possibilities. So always be reading, learning, listening, whatever it may be, but you have to be putting input into your head constantly that will give you the opportunity to think differently.
Yeah, I love that. I'm a huge reader and probably more a listener, so I'm very much audio books. But I did discover something recently. I'll share this here. I used to use Audible.
Yep.
And Audible for, I think it's 15 Australian, might be 9 or 10 US a month.
So probably like 100 a month in Canada.
Yeah, but what they give you is one audio book a month.
Right.
And I recently discovered Scribd, which is the same monthly fee, and you have unlimited books.
Oh, wow.
Both audio, written books, so like Kindle versions, and then there's a whole bunch of documents. So there's a whole range of documents there of people that have done summaries of books, both audio and written. So, which I love book summaries as well, because I like to go back to these book summaries after I've written a book, because it really refreshes it and it gives the person's perspective. And also, if you're looking to explore books, you can read the summary and say, no, that's not what I thought it was, based on the title, or yes, I'm really interested in that, so I'm going to go and get the book.
Wow. This is game changing. I'm on the site now. My mind is blown.
Yeah.
I did not know this existed, and it is way better deal. Oh, wow.
Yeah. Well, and now this is shameless self-promotion here. If I will post my affiliate link in the show notes here, because I think you get 60 days trial for free.
Okay. Nice.
Through that link. I'm not sure what they offer if you don't go through the link.
Yeah, it's 30 days if you don't. Yeah.
Okay. So
I have it too.
Yeah, you can. You get 60 days, and I also get another month. So, total transparency.
Like it.
But yeah, I've discovered that recently. And again, that was thanks to George Bryant.
Cool.
Another big shout out to George. All right. Now, what's the best thing you've done to develop new ideas?
Yeah, good question. So one of my favorite things to do when I'm really trying to figure out new things is to go and just like be one with nature. So I'm a big fan of going for walks and running. I like canoeing and kayaking. So I like to actually just get out and go on the water and just like paddle a bit and see what comes to me. And I find it's very easy to always be distracted, and it's hard to kind of innovate when you're constantly on your phone or on your laptop, etc. So I like to just like get out and be under the sun or on the water in the evenings and just chill. And that's when some ideas typically strike.
Yeah. How long's the daylight where you are right now? You must have long.
Yeah. So it's pretty there. It usually runs right now in the summer about from 8 until 10. So probably from 8 until 10. So a good chunk of time.
Okay.
8 a.m. until 10 p.m. Yeah.
That's interesting. So there must be lots of good canoeing around there, I imagine.
It is, yeah, tons. We've got a lake right across the street, so I'll probably head down there later this evening, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
All right, great. Yeah, I love to get out on my bike, and I find that if I kind of switch off there and just focus on the riding and the environment that I'm in, it generates lots of new ideas.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Hmm.
Very cool.
All right. Do you have a favorite resource you use most often?
So I do rely on two very basic tools. I use Google Sheets to keep track of various links that I've come across that I want to read later. I know that people will say you should use Pocket, you should use this app and this app, but I'm a good old-fashioned traditional like Google Sheets. Let me paste my links in there, and then I'll come back to them when I get a chance kind of guy. I use that to store a lot of concepts, but I also have a actual ongoing Google Sheet, and this isn't something I've ever shared, but I keep track of my own predictions. So whenever I have a prediction around, I think that this thing is going to happen in the future, I have a Google Sheet that's dedicated to it, and I write down what my prediction is in that Google Sheet, as well as the percentage and my likelihood of believing that this prediction will actually come true. So I have a sheet that actually keeps track of these beliefs that I have, and I revisit them to see if I've acted on them in any way, or if I was completely wrong about my assumption around that idea. So it'll be interesting. I've been using it for the last 2 years, and it's been cool to kind of see how ideas evolve over time. And again, it's just a good old fashioned Google Sheet.
Hmm. That's a fascinating idea. I haven't heard anybody do that before, but I think, yeah, I think that's a really great way of self-reflection.
Yeah,
Like the self-awareness thing is something that we're all challenged with in some ways, and that's a great way to kind of self-reflect. First of all,
yeah,
putting your thoughts and predictions down on paper,
right,
and then coming back and looking at, well, did that happen? And how
yeah,
confident were you in that? And
exactly. Yeah,
did you take any action to
based off of it.
yeah, love it.
Yeah, no, it's been fun to track, and I'm excited to see like what I'm wrong about in
Mm,
10 years or 5 years, et cetera. It's been cool.
yeah. All right, what's the best way to keep a project on track?
So this is a very basic answer, but it's
Yeah,
communication. I think that
yeah,
at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, the vast majority of the problems probably in the world are related to communication, right? Like communication and a lack of communication or poor communication, I believe, is one of the biggest challenges for people. And that's where it's so key. Like if you want to keep a project or a client on track, over communicate. There's probably no way that a client would feel like you are over communicating to them. So we always say internally, over communicate, over communicate. And I think as someone who like runs their own company, that's something that I try to do with the team as well, is give them as much information as possible, and then ensure that, of course, they're only getting information that is relevant for them to do what they need to accomplish. But at the same time, leaning more towards let's be more transparent, more over communicating than less.
mm, yeah, that's great advice. And I agree with you that communication's probably at the root of most of the problems in the world. If we could,
Right.
I guess it's a level of communication that generates an understanding
True.
that's and perhaps even empathy. So it's not just
Yeah.
telling
Yeah.
people
You just can't talk. Exactly.
yeah, here's
Right.
where we're at. It's kind of okay. This is the situation. Where are you at? And
Right.
how can I support you to move forward to the next steps? And
Exactly.
mm, yeah,
Yeah.
great.
I love it.
All right. Now, what's the number one thing anyone can do to differentiate themselves?
So I think the number one thing that's actually very easy is to find one thing that you really, really love, that you're really into, that you're very obsessed with, that you think not a lot of people in the world are actually interested in, and then just own that thing within your world and your space. So for me, I love the Fresh Prince, and I talk about Fresh Prince on Twitter all the time and on LinkedIn, etc. I use Fresh Prince gifts, etc., and it differentiates me. I think everybody has something as a human that within our layers, like an onion, that is very different and unique about us. Find that thing, talk about it often, don't be afraid of it, embrace what makes you weird, and talk about it on a regular basis, and people will resonate with it. That's kind of what I would suggest.
Yeah. Yes, and that certainly comes through the Fresh Prince
Yeah,
idea in many of your videos and even some of your
exactly.
written content. I think you
It
mentioned.
does. Yeah, it's everywhere.
Yeah. All right. Well, this has been fabulous, Ross. Now, where can people find out more about you? Perhaps even reach out and say thank you, or join the distribution challenge.
For sure. Yeah, so definitely check me out on Twitter at the coolest cool. That's my Twitter handle. I created it when I was in university, so don't judge me for that. But I'm also on LinkedIn at Ross Simmons. Like, just give me a shout on there. Just let me know where you're coming from and send me a request. I would love to be connected with you. And then, of course, on rosssimmons.com, that's my blog where I'm constantly publishing content. And foundationinc.co. I know that sounds like a lot of various places, but the reality is I'm a lot of places online, and I am easily accessible across all of them. So I would love to get connected further. Just do a quick Google search. I'm pretty much on every channel, every platform, and I would love to further connect.
And we'll post all those links in the show notes as well, so people can find them easily.
Great. Appreciate that.
Okay. Now, do you have any parting advice for our listener today?
Yeah, my parting advice, folks, would be to go back to what we talked about earlier. Like, we talked about a lot of different things, but at the core understanding of all of this is like, create content that your audience wants, distribute that content in the communities and channels in which your audience is spending time, find things that make you different, lean into it, embrace it, and don't be afraid to make mistakes along the way. At the end of the day, experiments are key to innovation. And if you can experiment, you're going to get a competitive advantage over the people who are not willing to do so. So that would kind of be my lasting advice for folks.
Wonderful. Yeah, I love it. And so create the assets, distribute them, and make sure you add value to the community that you're involved with, and then feel free to experiment. So I like to take the view that there's no such thing as failure. It's all just feedback. And we talked earlier about, getting feedback to motivate ourselves. So there's some feedback, some easy feedback to keep motivated.
I like it. That's
that
awesome.
doesn't work. Yeah. All right. Now, finally, who else should I get on this podcast?
Great question. So I think my dream guest would, of course, be Warren Buffett. Like I mentioned his quote. So if you can land him, that would be awesome. I think he's doing some great work. I've recently started to follow someone on Twitter. She's a psychologist, but she creates amazing content. She's an executive performance coach named Julie Gerner. She definitely would be someone who I think your listeners would get a lot of value from.
Okay. Well, we'll mention to Warren that you suggest we get him on. See what happens.
I like it.
I suspect there might be a hefty fee to get to chat with Warren. But Julie will, we'll definitely reach out to Julie and talk to her. So I'm sure she'll be open for a conversation.
That's great. I like it.
All right. Well, thanks so much for sharing your time and your wisdom and insights with us so generously today, Ross, and building this asset together with me.
I like it. Well, thank you for having me on. I've had a blast. I really appreciate you letting me share some thoughts with your audience.
Great. Well, I appreciate it too. And all the best for the future, and please stay in touch.
Will do.
I hope you enjoyed that entertaining, engaging and educational conversation with Ross and took something away from his episode. I love Ross's drive to keep learning and experimenting while balancing that with an intense focus on the core parts of his content strategy that works. I'm curious to know what you took away from Ross's episode. Leave a comment below the blog post, which you can find at innovabiz.co/Ross Simmons. That is ROSSSIMMONDS. All lowercase, all one word, innovabiz.co/Ross Simmons. You'll also find contact information for getting in touch with Ross there, as well as links to his personal website, the Foundation Marketing website, his social media pages, and the other resources we spoke about in today's conversation. Ross suggested that we have a conversation with Dr. Julie Gerner, Executive Performance Coach, on a future InnovaBuzz podcast episode. So, Julie, keep an eye on your inbox for an invitation from us to the InnovaBuzz podcast, courtesy of Ross Simmons. Tune in again to the next episodes of the InnovaBuzz podcast, where we've got more fantastic guests lined up, including Dr. Bruno Signaco of Human Oriented Enterprise and Dave McEwen, author of The Self-Evolved Leader. Thanks for listening to this episode. Make sure you subscribe to the show to be reminded of new episodes. It's free to subscribe. Leave a review if you like. Even if you don't like me, I'm okay with that. I'm asking you to leave a review because it helps other people find this show. Go to InnovaBuzz.co to join our marketing transformation community and access a free gift my team and I made for you. It's the Marketing Master Mini Class. We want to give you everything you need to transform your marketing into a human-centered, relationship-focused growth engine. Until next time, I'm Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz. Remember, be awesome and keep innovating.